You as a consumer will now get stronger protection and treatment by our financial services providers, all thanks to a regulatory model introduced by the National Treasury this month. It's called Twin Peaks. It does have its issues. It's not without complexity. Australia has been doing Twin Peaks for 20 years. But Andy Shmulo, who's an expert from Australia, South African-born expert from Australia, on this issue of Twin Peaks, why has the model in Australia seemingly fallen apart? One just has to look at the sort of revelations that are coming out about the Australian banking sector right now, and there's some pretty serious allegations of wrongdoing within your industry.
I wouldn't even know where to begin, Bruce. Indolence surrounded by incompetence, wrapped in ineptitude.
Hold on, indolence surrounded by incompetence, wrapped in ineptitude.
Yep.
I've got to use that at some point in the future. But in small words, the Australian banking system has found a way around Twin Peaks, or has just simply ignored it?
They haven't found a way around Twin Peaks. They've simply told the regulator to bugger off, and they have.
But why has it failed in that degree then?
Our regulators are weak, feckless and timid. Not my words.
Why did you say what you mean? Yes.
Not my words, the words of the Australian Senate. Right? The Australian Senate conducted an inquiry into ASIC's performance in 2014 and said to them, you are failure made manifest. You are not doing your job, you are not enforcing the law, you are weak, feckless and timid. 4 years later, things have gotten so much worse, we now have a Royal Commission of Inquiry. And every day the revelations are coming out. There were stories in the newspapers in Australia today. Senior politicians are calling for our big four banks to be broken up because they are now effectively beyond the reach of the law.
I mean, your Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, when he announced the appointment of this Royal Commission, which is about as strong a sanction as he can put on the financial system in Australia, sort of said it is with great regret. It's almost he's announced the death of somebody. There was quite strong political resistance to doing this.
It was embarrassing. It was embarrassing that he stood up in front of the nation and he said, it is with deep regret that we're announcing a Royal Commission, which I'm announcing because the banks have written to me to say, we can't stand the suspense anymore, just call the Royal Commission. I mean, he was more eager to protect the banks even when they'd said, we give up on that protection.
Leanne Jackson, you work in strategy, of course, at the new Financial Sector Conduct Authority, the FSCA. What is going to stop you going the same way as what seems like a disaster zone? We sought to emulate the best bits of Twin Peaks from Australia, but there are clearly some warning signs that it's not the silver bullet to regulatory issues.
I mean, Bruce, obviously it's difficult for me to comment on what's going on in another jurisdiction and what its root causes may or may not have been.
It sounds disastrous. How do we avoid it?
But first of all, we're right at the beginning of this journey. So, yes, we may have borrowed the architecture, but I think new as this framework is, we mustn't underestimate that there's a long and deep and very respectful relationship between our banking industry, mutual respect, and the historic regulatory framework. And with the, I think the relationship between the South African Reserve Bank and the banking sector in South Africa is one of integrity and has always been highly effective. So it's quite difficult to imagine an environment where the one party would be calling the other feckless and the other incompetent and inept. But yes, one always needs to be kept on toes. Importantly, the new regulatory environment doesn't only give us powers, it also gives us a lot of responsibilities in terms of monitoring the success of our outcomes, reporting back on them regularly, scanning whether we are actually achieving what we set out to do. We've got to publish our strategies, have them commented on by the public if they so wish. So, and the levels of coordination that are being imposed by this legislation are exceptionally tight.
So let's get a real world example. I borrow some money from the bank, they lend me money to buy a home. I believe the bank is calculating my interest wrongly. I go to the internal ombud within the bank and they brush me off. I then go to the banking ombud and they brush me off. And then I come to the Financial Sector Authority and I prove to you that in fact I've been maltreated not only by the bank but by the ombuds process. What do you do then? Because you're there for my protection, right?
Well, it's not. That's a reactive example. So that's when something's already gone wrong.
Okay.
I think the more important step is what do we do to make sure those things don't happen in the first place?
Right.
So part of the customer treatment or set of rules that are being imposed, and these are already happening in existing legislation, by the way, they're going to now be beefed up under this, is to set very rigorous standards on monitoring how you design your products in the first place. Are they fair? Can you demonstrate to us that you've determined whether they're appropriate to their target markets, what they've done? We also have, on the other end of the scale, for instance, if things do go wrong, you're required to have very rigorous monitoring of complaints and complaints handling yourself, not just passing the problem to an ombud. Having said that, in the ombud space, the new legislative framework also sets a whole new framework of coordination and puts additional responsibility on the ombuds themselves to also be more effective and more consistent. So
as a consumer of financial products, whether it be banking products or whether it be insurance products, whether it be health insurance, I'm assuming this falls under it, I should have a higher level of regulatory protection should things go bad, but things should go bad less often if you do your job properly and make sure that they do theirs.
Absolutely. It's about our primary focus being on making sure that we're watching the conduct of these institutions carefully enough that they don't go wrong in the first place, but then when they do, we have a much more joined up and wide-ranging set of powers, starting from relatively gentle stuff when in the early signs of seeing something might be going wrong, to extremely powerful.
Could you send a CEO to jail, for example?
We don't send to jail, the National Prosecuting Authority does, but what we could do is debar a CEO from ever operating in the industry again.
That is a strong sanction.
Which is a very strong. We can also issue directives ordering redress and other ways of fixing problems. So there's a big tool set there.
Can I come in at this point? You asked Leanne why she thinks South Africa will be different. I thought maybe I could give you an outsider's perspective. I've been dealing with people at National Treasury on this process since 2014 and then intensively on this panel of experts since December of last year. And, you know, I've come away really deeply impressed by the people I've been dealing with. Smart, switched on the ball, they're well-read, they understand what's going on internationally. They're very much across the examples that have come through internationally. They are deeply engaged in this process, and they seem to be really deeply committed to the ideational principles that underlie it. And those ideational principles are fundamentally, the society is not here for the banking industry. The banking industry is here for society. And you know, as you can tell, I'm not shy to criticise when it's necessary, and I'm just so impressed by the South African authorities.
I want to talk about why it's going to work better in South Africa, perhaps, than in other parts of the world where the Australian system is coming under a huge amount of pressure. More on this conversation after this break here on ENCA.